Greetings all, D&Disability here. I know I've recently been putting out some less academic videos, and I think it's time that we revisit our fundamentals series. Now, not so long ago, I came out with a video, actually a couple videos, talking about racism in D&D and sexism in D&D and all these other kind of controversial viewpoints, including monstrosity and that kind of thing. If you've missed those, feel free to go back and revisit them. And I think that central to a lot of these tensions is the role of myth, and specifically the role of what we call mythic play in game studies. Because when we create these stories, when we create D&D stories and adventures and stuff, we are taking these myths, whether they're cultural icons, such as, I don't know, the Medusa, as an example, or whether there's something brand new, and we are kind of crystallizing them into a game. Craige Page here in their essay, Playing with Myth, Applying Mythic Imagination to Live Action Roleplay, is an excellent example of how we can kind of critically look at the role myth plays, the role literature plays in our games, in our game systems, and really start to kind of boil down to where these changes happen, how they happen, and kind of why. And it's not that change is a bad thing, change is an awesome thing, right? That's kind of the whole point. But it's really just getting into the kind of three layers of play, that is to say, the world myth, heroic myth, and player myth, right? These three kind of categories of myth that demonstrate how these games interact with myth, how RPGs in general interact with myth, and what that means for us as game masters, as storytellers, and might just change the way you look at your games. So, TTRPGs are not merely plays or stories being told. They are an active, real-time engagement with and metamorphosis of myths, stories, and other narratives these games interact with. I mean, think about it. We steal from everything, right? Steal from your favorite comics, steal from your favorite books, steal from your favorite historical events, mix them all up, blend them together, and pop, out comes a D&D session, right? The quote-unquote script that is followed in a TTRPG is not dictated by a single author, or it's not really even a formal script in any sense of the word. The script for a TTRPG is little more than an outline of goals, concepts, themes, and rules that provide a boundary. You can think of it almost like a playground or a sandbox for participants to act within or without as they see fit. This level of interaction is brought up to some extent by Craige Page in their essay, as they examine LARP. And of course, LARP does differ from RPGs, TTRPGs especially, in certain aspects, but the overall points are still transferable to TTRPGs. So let's kind of start to delve into that, shall we? Page cites mythology as an intensely personal experience that takes precedence over the larger mythological narratives that have come before, and that LARP, and really RPGs in general, enables this unconscious, subconscious exploration of archetypes. For those that have heard the word archetypes before, it's because you've seen my other videos and heard me mention Jung. The dark beings, gatekeepers, mentors, and heroes in mythology that surface in role-playing interactions in LARP are among these archetypal number, and these are all recognized as archetypes in a Jungian sense. They are common to all mythology and manifest as patterns on the subconscious level, thus what makes them Jungian archetypes. These structural elements of myth, at least in Page's analysis, puts the rules and cultural background of the game each as a part of a Jungian archetypal whole that then share a commonality between LARP and TTRPGs. Okay, so now that we have the kind of big picture connections with Page understood, right? These kind of Jungian connections of how Myth and LARP and TTRPGs and all RPGs kind of interact at this big picture Jungian level, we can now move on to actually what Page says about the world myth, heroic myth, and player myth. Well, Page breaks these interactions down into those three levels: the world myth, heroic myth, player myth. These levels become progressively more personal to the players. The world myth contains the setting the role play takes place in, and is ultimately the realm of game developers and game masters who both manage the rules as well as non-player characters, i.e. NPCs, and their interactions. So this is where game masters interact with myths, make their authorial choices, make changes, etc. The heroic myth is the interaction of, in this instance, LARP for Page, but also for TTRPG heroes, with the heroic fiction associated with it. In other words, at this level of enactment, this is where the monster slaying, the journeying, and other world interactions take place. This level of interaction is experienced by both players and game masters together, and they feed off of each other like a loop. A change on one side may facilitate a change on the other side. As an example, players who attempt to talk to the Medusa rather than just instantly fight, the DM might have to decide, okay, well, what kind of monster is this? Is she friendly, etc. So our third element, that is to say the player myth, is told in reflection. This is what players take away from the game they just experienced, and these are the elements that get shared with numerous retellings of their experiences. One example of this would be to anyone that's played through, say, the Tomb of Horrors, right? You can share, oh, this is what my DM did with it. Oh, well, my DM adapted it so we all wouldn't die, etc. Significantly, Page gathered their data from real-world LARP players. This wasn't all just theoretical nonsense that often people criticize academics as just spouting. And it was in these interviews that Page realized these three levels of interaction that go beyond the myth or the rules or the game by themselves. While what the books or rules say is effectively an informative element, it's only one part of the picture. The role of literature must be allowed effectively a lessened influence on the game participants. And this is, of course, kind of pushing back against maybe some of the other cultural elements that Stang and Trammell are criticizing in their work. Okay, I know this was a shorter video this week, but I hope you can see the relationships between these three levels of myth, role-playing games, etc., and kind of see this is where we make changes. As DMs, as storytellers, we make changes. When the actual players come in and start interacting with characters, the players might make some changes, we might respond. And of course, no story is the same in the retelling either, right? Point of view, of course, matters. So, no matter how hard we might want to have our Theseus or our, Odyssey or whatever else, our version of Beowulf where we go and slay Grendel, it's never going to quite be the same as the myth. And you know what? That's okay. We don't have to be burdened by following just what the books say, or just what the myths say, or just what pop culture wants us to do. We can be individuals, we can be critical, and really that's kind of the key takeaway for me with Page, is looking at it kind of at these three levels and seeing, okay, well, I really planned on this encounter going this way, where they just show up and fight the Medusa, but my players wanted to sit and talk, so I had to change, right? And understanding where those changes come from so that we can better ourselves understand how these games operate, and of course, think about these games critically. All right, so take it easy. I'll see you next week.